Hi, everybody. Welcome to AI and Rights, Future Areas for Standards Work on Licensing, featuring Todd Carpenter, Executive Director of NISO, and Kris Kliemann of Kliemann Co, who is also Chair of the Rights Committee at BISG. This webinar is a joint effort of BISG's AI Working Group and the Rights Committee, so we're delighted to welcome you all here for this wonderful conversation. Todd has prepared a presentation for us, and then after that presentation, he and Kris will engage in conversation and discussion around the points, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. So if you have questions, I highly encourage you to use that Q&A function, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. As a reminder, this will also be recorded, and you'll be able to see it on our Knowledge Center later on. So without further ado, welcome, and Todd, let's kick things off.
All right, thanks so much, Brooke, and welcome everyone. I hope you all are having a fantastic day. I'm going to talk a little bit about standards and the state of the age of AI, a little bit of background about artificial intelligence system, how content is used in those systems, and how the landscape for licensing content to AI systems is developing and changing, and looking forward to a great conversation with Kris. Last week at the annual meeting of the Book Industry Study Group, the session ended with a fantastic conversation between Jeff Jarvis, who's a professor of media studies and the history of technology and at SUNY Stony Brook and some other institutions, as well as Michael Kirschbaum, who is professor at the University of Maryland. And they were talking about the application of AI systems and where that's headed and kind of the growth of AI systems. It was a fascinating conversation. I hope it was recorded, Brooke. I hope you can share that with the community. But they talked a lot about the role, the developing role of artificial intelligence and its use in content creation and content delivery. And to lay the groundwork here, I'm going to just start off with a couple minutes of very brief introduction to artificial intelligence systems, so that you all have a baseline understanding of what AI systems are doing, because that's critical to understanding the next step, which is how should we, the publishing community, leverage our relationship as content creators and content distributors in this new ecosystem. So in that context, there are two main approaches for how content relates to artificial intelligence systems. There are, to be fair, many others. I'm just going to focus on two. We only have an hour. And there are certainly courses. You could spend an entire semester, maybe even get an entire degree on artificial intelligence systems. But I'm going to focus on the two main applications for using AI, with ingesting content for AI systems. The first is for what's called model distillation, where content is ingested and trained on the base level model. So essentially, these systems are used to kind of train a computer system how to understand language. And then the second type of model is for content verification. This is called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG systems. And these two models are very different in how the content is used, how the content is applied, and set up a different relationship between the content producers and the AI systems that are licensing that content. It's a very important distinction to set up. So let's get into a very high level, very simplified. What is a machine doing as it's training itself to understand the English language? So when a machine, an AI system, reads, quote unquote, and those quotes are really important, it extracts the text from parts of the work and then places those tokens into a high dimensional space. So it's taking the content and atomizing it into an n-dimensional space where it can then analyze the distance between those tokens. And distance doesn't mean from mile marker A to mile marker B. We're operating in a kind of configurable multidimensional space here. So the calculation isn't a simple mathematical calculation. It's more of a statistical correlation. And then it analyzes the distance between those tokens and how often are those tokens related and connected given a set of parameters. Then the model is tuned to provide a kind of response model. In this way, you can get a model to understand English, and then you tune it to be obnoxious or friendly. ChatGPT a couple months ago released a model called Monday, which is sort of like the Marvin from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I kind of like, oh God, it's Monday and I'm horrible and I'm miserable. There are lots of ways in which you can train a model to interpret the language in its response mechanism. Okay? So in this way, models provide a reasonable approximation as text might appear in the original, even if you say, give me a version of, uh, you know, this scientific paper as if it was written by Goethe. Give me a style of a presentation as if it were written by Shakespeare or Dadaist. Any of those ideas, you can tune that model based on an understanding of how the English language is created, and then build into that an understanding of how you want to represent that in your responses. Okay, that's a very simple minute and a half explanation of a very technical area of computer science. It kind of gives you an understanding of what's actually happening behind the scenes. That is the base level understanding of English. A retrieval augmented generation architecture is a system that presents both a user interface and a response mechanism interchange between a user and the query and the response. And it uses a knowledge source that it references in the retrieval of information. So you type in a question and you say, what's the weather like in Baltimore? And it needs to understand that Baltimore is a place, that weather is a thing, and it could be nice or it could be bad, or what's the average rainfall or temperature range in April in Baltimore, which is in the mid-Atlantic region of the United States. It needs to understand all of those things, and then it will query a data source to do that. And that queryable data source is ideally the licensed published record, something that is a trustworthy source. And then it takes that content, understands what the answer is, and then it presents to the user, here's the answer in whatever form you had asked for. I would like this weather report in a, Dadaist poem. That is the interaction system in which a RAG architecture is used. And so the fundamental difference between these two systems is important to understand. Whereas if you are licensing content to a LLM model system, all they care about is words. How are words connected? How many words do you have? What's the size of the corpus that you have? It doesn't really matter the quality of the text. This is why they're scraping the entire internet for as many words as they can find. English language. Retrieval augmented generation architecture, on the other side, is really focused on the validity of the information. Can I trust these answers? And there's lots of hybrids. There's lots of different adjacencies between these different systems. Those are the two basic options. And one of the key issues in this entire ecosystem is the question of trust, because these systems fundamentally are probabilistic. It is not a knowledge of gravity or a knowledge of what is the book industry study group or what is published literature, etc. There is no understanding in either once the words are tokenized or parts of words are tokenized, there's no really understanding of an egg as a thing you might eat or a thing that a bird lays or anything like that. There is just the word egg. And in creating responses, it also has built into that system a certain amount of probabilistic nature of the responses so that it's not just saying the same thing over and over and over again. And human language has a sense of probability in the connection of words. But without understanding and meaning, you kind of lose that connection to reality. And so these systems have a problem with accurate, trustworthy information. And that's why issues of referencing, sourcing, search, verification are really important to building an ecosystem of trust with these systems. And this is a problem that the AI developers are aware of. It's a problem that our community, the publishing community, cares about. What is the source of this information? And building upon that, how does the publisher and the author get credit or monetary contribution for those resources? So building in this is the thing that I'm referring to is a critical element to building trust in these AI systems. So core to that is the notion of attribution. And there are a variety of needs when it comes to artificial intelligence systems that are technological, social, legal issues that need to be advanced in order for AI systems to gain trust in the community, to gain application, to get businesses to buy into purchasing them. And so we need to build this model of understanding and trust into this ecosystem. There are also business-related issues around this ecosystem that we have to focus on. Licensing, copyright. So attribution, certainly, that is a foundational level thing here. But how do we license content? How do we respect copyright is critically important. How do we set guardrails around what is acceptable use? How do we deal with questions about search and discovery? What is assessment? How do we measure the use of these systems? If you've opened up your publishing backend system to be crawled by AI systems, what's a cost per use in that ecosystem? And of course, transparency is critically important in building trust. So, you know, what is included in this system? Can I trust the materials that these models are built on? It's my belief that we need cross-industry initiatives to address all of these issues. And to that end, I'm going to focus now on some of the bigger problems, right? So as I mentioned, we have this model in which you've atomized the content. And how do we assess the content that is being generated by these systems? Is there a way that we can link back to the component elements, the original sourcing of that output, so that we can understand where it's coming from, how it was generated, whether it was valid, uh, whether or not the research paper that's been cited has been retracted? Maybe there is just a lot of references to connections between measles as a cure, vitamin A as a cure to measles. That text string is appearing all over the internet now. That doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Are there ways, though, that we can embed in this tokenization process links back to the source? How can we think about reintegrating that source information once content has been generated? How do we back propagate this? And this is actually where a lot of the AI systems are doing right now. It's sort of the flip side, maybe an undergraduate approach to research. Uh, I write something down and then I go search in Google for something that says what matches what I just said. That's one way to go about research, but it's not necessarily the most effective way to say develop a trustworthy output. And one of the other things that we might do, and we as an industry, the publishing industry writ large, is how can we affect an expectation of sourcing um, from the original source into these systems? If we are not pushing the community to drive towards a place where um, sourcing and attribution is an expectation, the technology vendors could throw up their arms and say, well, adding source information in the tokenization process adds too much processing power and blah, 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 blah. It never gets done. If we, through licensing, for example, push for things like attribution, then build that into our contracts, build in an expectation that attribution is critical, then we're more likely to see movement by those vendors in the building of these systems. Like, oh, attribution is really important. We have to address that problem and find a technical solution rather than just finding the easiest way out, which is, oh, it's too hard and we can't make it happen. So this kind of gets into some of the opportunities that I see that both the Book Industry Study Group and my organization, NISO, can affect change in this ecosystem. And here I need to be really cognizant of the power dynamics that exist. The technology companies that are leading the way in artificial intelligence, primarily driven by companies like Google, Amazon, Meta, uh, OpenAI, these are Apple. These companies have billions of dollars in quarterly profit, which is, you know, more than some companies in our space or even the larger companies are. And so that is a certain power imbalance that we need to be aware of and recognize, but we are not powerless here. And they have a need for the content that our community provides, particularly copyrighted content that is probably the most valuable content that they can use. And this licensing ecosystem is actually beset with a number of issues. There are a variety of lawsuits here. I'm not going to talk about lawsuits, but the licensing ecosystem, which is developing and has been growing over the last couple of years, has been centered around, first of all, every tech company who walks in the door wants to start the license negotiation process with a non-disclosure agreement, which prevents discussion about the fact that you even have a deal, possibly that you're negotiating a deal, and it certainly would prevent you from understanding the issues given the power of the power dynamics here, or communicating with others in the ecosystem about what's going on, which puts publishers who are licensing the content in a strategic disadvantage. There's also, because of this, a lot of duplication of legal effort. There's increased cost. Kind of reminds me of the early days of library licensing of content, electronic content in the late 90s, where every deal is a bespoke deal. There was no there was no consistent terminology. Every time you went into a license negotiation, you started arguing with the counsel on the other side, be it a business general counsel or an academic general counsel, about what do we mean by these terms? What's a user? Who is a subscribed user? Who has access? What is a download? There's all these things that we've kind of come to expect in negotiation of licenses as it comes to digital content that we have spent decades working through. So one idea here is, could we develop model licenses or model license for AI training, either RAG systems or just LLM systems? And what are some of the things we could capture there? Or simply just baseline terminology. And model licenses um, is something that I'll get into in a little bit more detail in a moment. There are fundamentally, I think, three core ways in which AI systems developers are going to be controlled in our ecosystem. The first is through legislation, which realistically is highly unlikely. And if it does take place, it will take place in a very congressionally slow timescale. Um, there is regulation that could be written probably more quickly. My concern there is that regulation and the regulators are sort of captured by industry to get what they would like, and by this I mean the tech industry, what they would like to see in outputs of that regulation, which will probably be more likely leaning towards the benefits of AI tooling, and protections for copyright exemptions for mining content. The third, and where think where the publishing industry has the most power and the most likeliness to achieve publishers' near-term goals, is in the space of contract and licensing. What do we as an industry want to put in those licenses that protect publisher interests? Now, want to be careful. This is obviously, we need to do this in a way that recognizes antitrust issues, et cetera. But I think there are models by which the community has agreed model license terminology, which you then enter into a negotiation with your trading partner, and everything is on the table. You might argue about long-term preservation. You might argue about um, defined users or verbatim quotes. But you start from a place of consistent terminology, and then you negotiate the details. So what would we benefit from using model license terminology in the space of AI? So the first of these is efficiency. If every if every legal license is a bespoke agreement, um, negotiation is slowed, uh, legal expenses are increased. Um, it's going to slow the process down and increase legal costs for negotiating this. We also lack consistency around key issues, licensing terms that will help to build transparency and trust between the publishing community and the tech community. Ideally, we'd also like to get to legal clarity about some of the terms here, and model licenses provide that opportunity to reduce ambiguity so that we all understand what we mean when we say XYZ. Terms are clearly defined in a community-centered way so that everyone understands their rights and obligations. And then finally, this notion of transparency and creating a transparent environment increases fairness that removes some of the power imbalances based on knowledge gaps in the process of licensing. If this is your first deal with a AI system developer, you are at a power disadvantage. And a model license will help you to overcome some of that, challenge, because as a community, we've agreed about some of the terminology and some of the legal issues here. That's not to say that that gives you complete power over the relationship, or that any of these terms could be changed in the agreement that you finally sign, but it's a place to start. some of the community norms that I think we could include in this discussion are around verbatim quotes. So how much is acceptable? Obviously, all of these things are probabilistic, and an AI systems vendor would say, well, it's just as likely as anything else that I could say to be or not to be. If that were copyrighted, I would want to have that recognized, right? And since that's 500 years of people saying to be or not to be, who's to say that it came from the first folio of William Shakespeare? It could have come from any number of sources over the last several hundred years. And as content continues to be reused and repurposed, it might not have come from the original screenplay. It might have come from not the book, but a summary of the book or a review of the book. And so there is a certain amount of gray space where a tech provider could say, well, this didn't come from you, it came from somewhere. Attribution. I spent a lot of time talking about attribution because I think it's core to this notion that we stand on the shoulder of giants. We should reference where our ideas are coming from. Obviously, if I'm making a painting, who's to say that I'm not influenced by Jackson Pollock in some fashion, or Andy Warhol, or wherever. And the same with writing. I could have flourishes of Roman literature as much as I have flourishes of anything else. But understanding, we have technical systems that can pull those details out. Content integrity to prevent misrepresentation is really important. How do you represent how connections were developed between content objects in this knowledge generation? How do we ensure ethical use of published content that protects the privacy of subjects to ensure that retracted information is removed, maybe potentially harmful outputs? How do we think about where applications stop? Like if I license this to Meta for their model development, how do I then extend that license to all of the people who are using Meta systems or building systems off Meta's original model development? And then thinking also about how do we think about usage and tracking and providing business intelligence to the publishing community that can support future editorial development. All of that information that kind of we had been building up in understanding usage models in digital reading, all of that is gone when you now put an AI system in the middle of it. How do we continue to maintain those value propositions? So this is a variant of a talk I had done at the January Doing Rights Right event in New York. And over the last couple months, I've been having lots of conversations about some of these topics. I wrote about this in a Scholarly Kitchen blog post back in February. We, NISO, are also hosting a series of workshops on artificial intelligence systems to brainstorm and prioritize activities in this space. I expect that out of that, we are obviously going to be producing a report of what transpired in those workshops later in May. We probably, NISO, will launch maybe 2 to 4 different projects to advance narrow elements of this scope of how the AI systems relate to our community. There will likely be many more ideas, and I am happy to work with other partners in the industry, BISG, the STM Association, AAP, et cetera. Think about ways in which, how can we advance our entire community in dealing with some of these issues? Licensing is a perfect example where BISG has great ties to the literary community, agents community, the rights community, et cetera. Maybe there's a potential here for partnerships, and I'm happy to kind of explore those. So that's a quick round the world introduction to some of the thoughts on AI. I see there's lots of opportunity for questions. I think Kris and I are going to have a really great conversation now. So if anyone has any questions, want to reach out to me, there's my contact information. I'm happy to engage with you all. So I'll stop sharing.
Todd, thank you so much. It's really means a lot. I think that you are putting forward definitions like this, which are really helpful to people who haven't yet had an opportunity to talk about licensing content. A lot of us are just trying to keep up with this and figure out what it is. So those slides at the beginning are hugely helpful. And again, thank you for pushing out the idea of building some model licenses. We've seen it work in the past. I think there's a comment in the chat too from Lee at IBPA. There are a lot of instances in other parts of our publishing world where people have been able to lean on templates that are out there in the world. And in this kind of situation where we're really struggling to understand, where there is a huge power imbalance, and we're really struggling to even understand what the possible terms might be, it'll make a big difference, I think, to have a few really detailed models that'll get people forward.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I wanted to bring up about, I'm sure all this will come out in some of your community meetings. Well, I guess first, don't you think it's important that everybody who's thinking about licensing to an AI system spend some time using AI? I mean, sometimes we use these very basic examples, like as you did, which is helpful. What's the weather in Baltimore? But we all know we can go to the Weather Channel and get the weather in Baltimore. And what's more illuminating in a way was for me anyway, was trying to ask a more complex question, a personal question. I'm going on a trip to England, and I have an 86-year-old grandma, 2 5-year-old twins, and we won't be driving a car. What can we do in Portsmouth? And what days are these things open? And trying to sort of, and what's astonishing, of course, is how quickly you get an answer to an extremely complex question, which isn't just going to portsmouth.com or .co.uk. It's,
right.
Pulling in a lot of information from a lot of different systems. And that's what's at stake here, that these systems pull not just from my books at my publishing company or my articles from my single journal, but a lot of information from a huge swath of content, more than my human brain can ever imagine. And knowing that that's going to be the case, how to do things like, do you personally think it's possible to embed attribution into atoms of content, or embed some kind of tracker?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I encourage everyone, if you haven't, use some of these systems and actually use a variety of them. They're all slightly different. Perplexity does a better job with attribution than ChatGPT.
Right.
If you search Google nowadays, the Gemini Google tool is the first third of the page. And this actually creates a significant challenge to publishers. Where previously Google would give you a list of links that say, oh, this is a snippet out of this book. Here's a link to go see that book. And you can buy it at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or your local bookstore. These AI systems will give you a summary of the book. So if you are searching for what to do in Portsmouth in July, you don't have to buy Frommer's Guide anymore, because the AI system generates the result that you don't have to buy the book. You don't have to go visit the New York Times to read the story about, why the Navy lost the $60 million plane yesterday. It'll give you a short summary. So in that environment, in that search discovery environment, I ask a question. I don't want a link, right? I want the answer to the question. The problem with that is it breaks the connection to your content, that your book, your article, your newspaper. That's the real challenge in this ecosystem. And if you've licensed all of your content but don't have the attribution, or don't have a method of monetizing that on a per use basis, you might just, all you might get is we sold our content for LLM developers, and that's it. That's
that's
like
it.
the worst
Yeah.
case scenario for publishers.
So that goes back to this is what I'm referring to. Here's the answer. These are the sources I used. The AI system. These are the sources I used.
Because that attribution is useful to say, I may or may not trust Kris about her advice on Portsmouth, but I want to know where it's coming from.
Right.
I trust Frommer's Guide. I trust, Lonely Planet. I trust those published sources. Do I really trust Reddit? Maybe.
Yeah.
And one way I like to describe this entire ecosystem is that trust and your need for validity exists on a spectrum. If I want an AI tool to write bedtime stories for my daughter, it doesn't matter if it's true or false, right? If I'm going to Portsmouth, I may, or it might ruin my day, but I probably could survive if I get wrong information. People are using AI systems now to decide about medical decisions.
Exactly.
If I'm at a if I'm writing a PhD, I want my sources to be trusted and validated. If I'm standing up in front of a judge, I don't want there to be hallucinations about the papers I'm citing, the cases. If I'm a pharmaceutical company and I've just spent $100 million to create a drug that I'm going to stick in the arms of 500 million people, there better not be any hallucination. And so it's that spectrum, and attribution is the best way to say, do I trust this thing?
Right. I mean, I think it's interesting that you're pushing on the contract piece and the verbatim quote piece. I mean, making the difference between attribution and verbatim quote, I think, is important. I have talked to some publishers who've said, I don't really want attribution from these systems because I don't trust them enough to have them say I said that. I think that's an issue for some people. I don't know if anybody on the call wants to make a comment on that, but there are times maybe where we as publishers don't want to be associated with output that we feel could be sketchy just based on the technology ability. That it couldn't spit back something accurate. On the other hand, making sure that the content's available, the possibly good content, our good content is available to possibly come up in an answer is still something we would want to shoot for.
No, I think increasingly these tools are going to be more and more embedded in Microsoft Office has got tools now, Copilot.
Yeah.
Google is developing them. My phone just updated, and now Apple is sending me summaries of everything, right? The more and more these tools are going to get embedded in technology that everyone uses, the more important it will be for our community to set ourselves up as sources of truth, sources of, either truth, call it fact, or call it, this is my original idea. These are my ideas. My wife, wrote a book last year, and her concern when the company that published her book licensed content to AI systems is, well, I don't want someone else to, get credit for my ideas. You know, what if Disney or some other, movie company writes a, AI generated movie script based on some of those ideas? That's, um, you know, that's a license. That's a license.
Yeah, it's absolutely a licensing issue.
License opportunity, and that we want to leverage. We want to take advantage of. We want to protect the rights of the authors who have the, the intellectual wellspring of these ideas. We want to protect them. That's part of what we're in the business to do.
Do you have examples? Sorry, Brooke, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kris.
I was just going to ask if Todd has an example of a RAG implementation that would be illuminating for us at this point. I mean, I think we know, we've read a lot, or I have, I hope people have, about the LLM training issues and the RAG piece, which puts me more in the mind of text and data mining on specific questions and collections of content, but on steroids, obviously, or on AI, if that's how you want to put it. Do you have any existing examples? I'm trying to get at the question of, are these companies going to be capable of reporting on users? And when you're within a garden, say, of a specific company using a RAG application, you would clearly have a user count, if that was one of the metrics we were going to think about.
I mean, in the corporate landscape, absolutely, there are lots of licensing deals that exist where, if I'm a oil drilling company, I want all of the information on geophysics so that I can ping my questions off this very narrow pool of information, and then, only spit back trusted, valid information about these. It's a lot of it is domain specific, scientific, professional content in those systems. Less so, the literary works. But yeah, there is absolutely a marketplace for that, and a variety of content of AI players. Not necessarily the big model developers, but smaller niche AI systems developers are licensing content specific for pharmaceutical applications or for, industry specific needs. The automotive industry, engineering, those sorts of things. There's a lot of that going on. And unfortunately, there's also like, oh, I've signed a few NDAs. There's things I know I can't talk about. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly a marketplace. And the question is for, the publishers on the line, what is the content and what is the marketplace for your content in that ecosystem? It could be travel guides. It could be, more or less every app, right, that serves every small niche market wants to get in on the AI tool, because their funders, their business models, they're all saying, hey, what's your AI play? Well, my AI play is I've got this core niche of content that is trustworthy, and you can use my app that generates travel guide recommendations because I've got this licensed content from travel, travel publisher.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'd love to kind of pivot the conversation and take some of the questions that we have in the Q&A. So our first one, Todd or Kris, both of you can weigh in here. If we're frustrated by the ethics or lack thereof of how large language models have trained on copyrighted materials, what LLMs can we experiment with that don't cross the line?
I think it's fair to say that there isn't one that hasn't, just by the nature of how they're ingesting content. That there is a lot of pirated works and pirated content sites that these tool developers have not been particularly ethical in blocking or excluding from their crawlers.
I mean, I will say,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Todd. Say some more.
I do think that they're getting better, and I think they're more attentive to licensing content today than they were 2 years ago. And the training models are on a 6 to 9 month release cycle. So hopefully we're moving in a more ethical license direction.
Well, we know on the one hand, licenses have been made. I see Lee, I get you, Lee, that because it feels like you're playing in a dirty playground, you don't want to go play there because it's bad. What has happened in the past it's been probably 18 months to 2 years now that publishers have made licenses with some of the big AI companies. So although the initial setup was by scraping the internet and using a lot of content that was available in pirated libraries, there are legitimate agreements now. And I would only say, it's worth it to spend a little time just understanding what this can be. I'm not going to be an advocate for all things AI, but I am going to say that I have some excitement about the possibility of expanding what can be known, because these powerful engines are out there now, putting together disparate pieces of factual information in ways that help us come to conclusions. This is, my simplistic way of understanding, the power of the STM world, right? If all the information from all the scientists around the world can come together in some way that synthesizes conclusions, we have better medicine. We have cures for cancer. We understand even smaller things that, would not have been solved in the timeline. So that's where the excitement comes from. It's funny to have your paper on what the density of the steel should be in the building you're building in the style of Shakespeare, but that's not what is the real promise of this.
Yeah, and it's also important to recognize that AI is a very broad term, and there are many things that used to be AI which are now no longer AI. Optical character recognition, that used to be a forefront, impossible thing that computers couldn't possibly do. And it took 30 years, but now computers are really good at it. The kind of new discovery that you're talking about, Kris, is an example of neural net processing, which is a subset of AI, where you can figure out how proteins fold and have machines learn on their own, which is a different type of AI. I'm particularly talking here about large language models, and content generation models, chatbots, etc. That is just one domain of these broader issues, and it's important. a lot of people just throw around AI, and I've been maybe a little lax in my terminology use. As I'm using it in this webinar, it's been focused on large language models and that space.
Yeah.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you both. Let's turn to another question. A participant has said, I'm developing plagiarism detection models to counter AI-assisted copyright infringement. I've observed that fraudsters are using AI to transform copyrighted books in various ways. Some transformations are relatively easy to detect, and others are more challenging. This raises an important question. At what threshold does transformed content legally qualify as new original work, rather than a violation of copyright of the source material? This participant is particularly interested in legal precedents or established guidelines that help distinguish between derivative works requiring permission and truly transformative works that qualify as fair use.
Yeah. Not a lawyer.
Not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead, Kris. You're probably
No,
better
I just
placed to
think,
answer this than I am.
well, I'm not, I don't have a good answer. That's the truth. I think that there are cases, there are attorneys who could speak to that eloquently. I think we've grappled with this in a lot of different ways. If you just want to look at like how long it took people to think anything about fan fiction, you know, it's I'm a licensing person, so I think it's all about licensing. That you have to go really far to get to something that is not a breach of an existing piece of content.
Some sort of derivative work. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the only thing I would add there is if you're using AI systems to write that, then that content, at least as of today, according to the Copyright Office, is not copyrightable. Whether or not there's anyone who's going to be able to check, but technically speaking, if you machine wrote it, then it's not human generated original content. But I'm sure there are people out there who are writing it and putting copyright symbols on it and saying that it's theirs.
We have another related question that touches on copyright. So an author writes a book. It's a unique expression of an idea or theory made up of thousands of carefully selected words, phrases, and architectures of thought. Atomization breaks all of that careful construction down. Todd, how do you think that we can keep these discussions of licensing for AI in the realm of copyright, which is the foundation on which writers build their work and relies on the concept of the work as a whole?
This is also a really interesting question in terms of where is the fine line? And I expect that the courts, and this will probably land in the Supreme Court, probably in the next couple of years, although it'll probably be a couple of years before it even gets resolved. So we're talking 5 years maybe, and then, you know, I mean, think about how long it took to settle the Google Books arrangement. Atomization could be fair use. Tokenization could be fair use. Where I think the fine line is in the regeneration of that content. And that is the copying action, if you will. The larger issue about how we maintain a kind of narrative structure of ideas and connect those ideas meaningfully, and how do we own that as our intellectual property is going to be probably the really interesting question of the next decade. What's the uniqueness of our content creation? What's the uniqueness of our humanity? A friend of mine, I posted an article a couple of weeks ago and used an AI generation tool to create some associated image with the content. And I said, you know, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to create original artwork. And they said, that's not art. It's an image, it's not art. What distinguishes art fundamentally is the thought process behind it. You know, last fall, some guy bought a banana taped to a wall for $2 million. The idea is what was important there. It wasn't the banana or the duct tape. In the same way that, this isn't, there's sort of a variety of artistic movements that just say, here's this glass and I'm setting it on a table and that's art. It's the thought process, it's the connectivity. That's what makes it the humanity there that is uniquely human. And I think the thing that we really need to preserve.
Do we know if the Copyright Clearance Center has already established licenses for large language models, or is this something that they would be positioned to create in the future?
CCC does have a license, repository license, which can be used. Publishers need to work with CCC and assign those rights to CCC. My sense is that is insufficient. But
Well, there just to, because I know a little bit about that, and
yeah.
if someone from CCC were here, they would explain it to us even more clearly. Their license is an ability for a publisher to agree to include the publisher's content in a repertory that CCC then includes in their own licenses to corporations. That's the business, that's one of the businesses that CCC is in, is going to corporations and saying, you subscribe to this content, but you want to do other things with this content, such as include it in an AI application for your business, a RAG application for your business. And we have now gathered up all of this content from these publishers with their consent, right? So it's all legal, and you may now use this in your AI application. For that, CCC receives money, and CCC in turn spreads that money back out to the participants in that collective repository. So that's a little different than what we've been getting at and what you'll get at with your model, which is what does it look like to license content directly to a system, an AI system, LLM or RAG purveyor, someone who's creating a system like that, right?
Yeah.
So yes, you should. I mean, I would say one of the things I did last week that I can recommend is CCC had a free webinar on where all the legal cases are for AI. It was a 30-minute webinar. You can sign up and get on their list for those kinds of updates, which I think help all of us understand where things are moving. I also see a couple comments from Paul Sweeting in the chat. These ideas get discussed in a couple different ways. There's a newsletter called Rights Tech Newsletter, if I'm saying it properly, that's useful for information. For me, I'm trying to source a lot of information from a lot of different places. Todd is writing about it, as are others on Scholarly Kitchen as well.
And if you have, I would encourage you, if you have questions about CCC's license arrangement, they're more than happy to talk to you, I'm sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we're about at the hour, so I just want to take a moment to thank you, Todd, and thank you, Kris, for sharing your time and your expertise and engaging in this discussion with us. As a reminder, this is recorded, so it'll be available on our Knowledge Center shortly. I do want to make a note that it's in the chat. If you're interested in this conversation and would like to continue this work, our AI working group and our rights committee are actively looking for volunteers. So if you want to, borrowing from the theme of our annual meeting last week, help us move fast and fix things, we really encourage you to reach out and get involved. We also will be having more webinars on AI in the future. To keep a tab on those, I'm dropping a link in the chat. Our next one will feature Joshua Talent of Firebrand Technologies and Brooke Dobson of Shimmer AI, and that will be specifically on how to use AI for marketing and how to boost your sales on Amazon. If that is something of interest, we'd love to see you there. So thank you very much, everyone. Hope you found this session informative. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
bye.